We quickly move on to the next session for the day. It is special session 2, and the theme is strengthening multilateral cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. And while the changeover happens, I would quickly like to announce the next session panelists. We have the session moderator, Mr. Ambarish Dasgupta, is a senior partner in Turi Consulting LLP and former head of management consulting KPMG India and former head of consulting PwC India.
Hello,
we have Mr. Ishikawa Yashishisha, Consul General, Consulate General of Japan in Kolkata. Dr. Bradley Jansen Marg, he is a senior advisor and distinguished senior research fellow of Cambodia Institute of International Cooperation and Peace and provost VR for academic affairs, Paragon International University. Dr. Bradley Jansen Marg could not be here physically today. He will join virtually. Dr. Satish C. Mishra, founder and executive director, Arthashastra Institute, Bali, Indonesia. He's come all the way from Indonesia. We have Dr. Mridul Sagar, professor, Indian Institute of Management, IIM Kozhikode. And we also have Mr. Rahul Mazumdar,
Hello,
Deputy
sir.
General Manager, Research and Analysis Group, Exim Bank. So can we request the panelists and the moderator to please take their seats in the dais? And may I request the audience to kindly settle down. We do not, it is not a break. There's no tea, coffee getting served outside. So kindly settle down, please. The proceedings are on back to back. Mr. Majumdar, if you can take your seat in the dais. Consul General, sir, please. May I request my colleagues to usher the panelists in the on the dais, please. Hi, Bradley. Good afternoon. Can you hear us?
Good afternoon.
Okay. Can you be a bit louder, Bradley? A little bit louder?
Oh, yes, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah. That's good enough. Thank you.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you.
Dr. Mishra? Dr. Satish Mishra? Dr. Mridul Sagar, Mr. Ambarish Dasgupta, Dr. Satish Mishra, can I request my colleagues to check Mr. Satish Mishra, Dr. Satish Mishra? Okay. So Bradley has also joined, so you can just, you can see him, sir, there. So can you check with him whether he can hear you? I have checked. This mic is working fine. Your mic, please.
Hello, Dr. Bradley, can you hear me?
Yes, no problems at all. Thanks.
Good.
I'd request Mr. Ambarish Dasgupta to take over the proceedings, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My very humble greetings to my panelists. I firstly, again, like the Chief Economic Advisor, would like to really compliment Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industries for carrying sessions on this theme, Indo-Pacific, for the last 3 years, including this year as well. And this particular session, which I'm supposed to moderate with 4 very eminent speakers, is on the cooperation amongst the Indo-Pacific countries. So this session is more on the cooperation. Now, I will really not want this session to go or dive deep into the formation of the Indo-Pacific, into the composition and on the economic sides of the Indo-Pacific, because that was well deliberated yesterday. how much of the world's GDP, how much of the world's trade that Indo-Pacific handles. But before we move into the cooperation, we would like to understand that this Indo-Pacific definitely, as we have understood by now, is not exactly a kind of any secretariat or a treaty or a pact. It's a more like a concept. It's a more like a concept floated by US also when they started this IPEF, IPEC, then supported by many other countries, and then continuously being supported by the various quotations of the various leaders of the country that they need to build up something in Indo-Pacific, but it's still not a pact like a NATO or an SCO or an ASEAN. It's still a concept or an imagination. Considering that, and having its constituents in the Indo-Pacific, a vast number of countries, and if we, for the time being, take out the two major players, the US and the China, out of it, though they are very much, though one not being geographically part of it, but very much possibly in supporting or in terms of emotionally being there. But if we take the all other constituents, then we have the SAARC countries, we have the ASEAN, we have the Oceania, we have the Pacific, we have East Africa, we have the West Indies nations. So it's a large number of countries that are part of this concept of Indo-Pacific. And then there are number of agreements which is there within the Indo-Pacific countries, like the IPEF, AOIP, Pacific Inland, AFTA, BIMSTEC, BBIN, Mekong-Gonga, MGC, Pact. So there are so many trade agreements, corridor agreements that's within the Indo-Pacific. So it looks like that Indo-Pacific is an umbrella of various agreements and a concept of many countries coming together. Now, having said that, when we start getting into the discussion on cooperation, then it's a question of cooperation between whom? And how do we really make cooperation happen between such a diversified mass of countries at completely varying levels of maturity, trade maturity, economic maturity, legal maturity, demographic difference, religious difference? How do we really bring such collaboration in it? And therefore, what could be the dimensions of this collaboration? It could be like a security cooperation, defense cooperation, trade cooperation, shareability of, as Chief Economic Advisor was saying, the shareability of the initial costs of climate adaptability or green energy, so, or the protection of the sea routes. How do we really bring in the cooperation and on what axis, rather than really trying to bring the cooperation on all axes together? And every country will really have to work towards its own economic prosperity. I mean, the first thing that they will have to take care of its own economic prosperity. Then also the question comes in that my economic prosperity in that country will come by becoming more collaborative with my Indo-Pacific neighbors, or my economic prosperity will come by becoming more collaborative with my non-Indo-Pacific stakeholders or countries. But the first thing that the countries need to, of course, consider is their economic prosperity. And therefore, in terms of the economic prosperity, how will these cooperation help? The bilateral trade agreements will take a back seat, or the multilateral trade agreements among all the Indo-Pacific countries. And then there are also conflict of interests between these various Indo-Pacific nations as well. There are conflicts between the political interests, there are conflicts between the trade interests also. So how, in this situation of so many conflicting interests also coming up or already in place, how does an Indo-Pacific collaboration work together? Now, with this, I will go one by one to the speakers. I will not really be introducing the speakers because their profiles are so astounding that it can actually take 50 minutes if I try to introduce the speaker's background. It's all on the screen itself. Our first speaker today is, and the speakers of course can talk from their chairs there or come here, but we'd love to have the first session between 7 to 8 minutes, and I would love to come back to the speakers also at a second round. So with this, I will first request the Honorable Consul General of Japan to make his comments on this subject.
Thank you for your introduction. Distinguished Chair, Mr. Ambarish Dasgupta, distinguished speakers in the panel, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Before I begin, I'd like to extend my sincere thanks to the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry for holding this Indo-Pacific Economic Conclave for 3 consecutive years in a row, in association with the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. I'm sure a series of engaging discussions were made yesterday, and a lot more is coming up today. Well, in this special session themed Strengthening Multilateral Cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, I would like to very briefly point out some of my personal observations. Indo-Pacific is a vast and dynamic geopolitical region, as you know, encompassing over 50 countries. Indo-Pacific region has over 60% of the global population and holds a significant pie of the world economy with more than 60% of the world GDP. The region is strategically significant due to its abundant natural resources, the central role in global supply chains, presence of vital choke points like the Strait of Malacca as an economic corridor, and for many other reasons. Therefore, stability and security of this region is critical for ensuring global prosperity. Japan is an active player in strengthening multilateral cooperations in the Indo-Pacific. Some of Japan's landmark cooperation projects in this region include Japan-ASEAN Connectivity Initiatives, Japan-Philippines Reciprocal Access Agreement, Japan-Philippines-US Trilateral Cooperation, Japan-India Digital Partnership, Rare Earths and Clean Energy Partnership with Indian firms, Smart Island and Green Port initiatives in India, and so forth. Japan has always been and will be committed to promoting peace, stability, and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region. In that aim, our former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, for the first time in 2016, announced his vision of free and open Indo-Pacific, FOIP, which was based on 3 pillars. In pursuit of a free, open, peaceful, prosperous, coercion-free, and an inclusive Indo-Pacific region, Japan strongly vouched for, number 1, establishing rule of law, freedom of navigation, free trade. Number 2, pursuing economic prosperity by physical connectivity, people-to-people connectivity, and institutional connectivity, among others. Number 3, commitment for peace and stability through capacity building assistance in the region and cooperation such as humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, anti-piracy, counter-terrorism, and non-proliferation. Our former Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, during his visit to India in 2023, delivered a policy speech entitled "The Future of the Indo-Pacific, Japan's New Plan for a Free and Open Indo-Pacific, together with India as an indispensable partner," announcing Japan's new plan for FOIP, which launches the 4 pillars of cooperation for FOIP. 1, principle for peace and rules for prosperity. 2, addressing challenges in the Indo-Pacific way. 3, multilayered connectivity. And 4, extending efforts for security and safe use of the sea to the air. Prime Minister Kishida also welcomed the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, IPOI, announced by Prime Minister Modi in 2019, and acknowledged the growing space for cooperation between the IPOI and FOIP. Japan, along with other Quad members, US, Australia, and India, is committed to support the Indo-Pacific agenda that covers maritime security, economic resilience, technological cooperation, resilient supply chains, and critical minerals initiatives. Recently, Quad is launching the Ports of the Future initiatives in Mumbai. As a Quad member, Japan commits to extend tangible support to its regional partners. So far, 6 Quad leaders summits have been concluded, the last one being held in US. If everything goes as scheduled, India would host the next Quad leaders summit sometime later this year. As you know, Prime Minister Modi made his 8th official visit to Japan last month for joining the 15th Japan-India Annual Summit meeting with our Prime Minister Ishiba Shigeru. Japan-India relations have made a great progress in the last 10 years, and the two countries held great potential for further enhancing such progress in coming decade, and elevates our bilateral relations to a new height. In the last summit meeting, Prime Minister Ishiba stated that Japan and India, which share fundamental values and strategic interests, bear great responsibility for peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific region and international society. He also expressed his desire to fulfill this responsibility together with Prime Minister Modi. The two leaders reaffirmed the importance of free and open Indo-Pacific FOIP. Prime Minister Modi has also appreciated that Japan is an important partner and that he wishes to deepen our cooperation in a wide-ranging field, including Quad grouping. I think when Japan acts on strengthening bilateral cooperation with India, in a way, it contributes to strengthening multilateral cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. Strong India is Japan's interest, and also strong Japan is also India's interest, I believe. Japan and India will commemorate the 75 years of our bilateral relations in 2027. During these 8 decades, Japan has been extending economic cooperation to India to accelerate India's infrastructure development in priority sectors. The ongoing Mumbai-Ahmedabad high-speed rail recently flagged off East-West Metro Corridor in Kolkata, Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor, Chennai-Bengaluru Industrial Corridor are some of the very popular projects in India which Japan has funded for. To conclude, I would like to say that Japan will continue to play a major role to extend economic cooperation to India. Both our countries are committed to multidimensional collaboration to improve infrastructure synergies. A series of deliberations are coming up in today's conference by the domain experts, policy makers, and stakeholders. I hope the conclave will come out with many thought-provoking ideas, solutions, and meaningful takeaways. Wish the conclave a grand success. Before I close, I must extend my advanced congratulations to President-designate Mr. Roy and his teams, followed by the Chamber's annual general meeting today. Thank you for your patient hearing. Thank you.
So as I understand that Honorable Consul General Ishikawa-san will have to leave and therefore may not be able to stay through. So therefore just one question for him before he leaves is, Ishikawa-san, I know, and you also mentioned that the Japan's contribution towards the Japan-India cooperation on all aspects, not just in economic, is really going very well. Your contribution to the Indo-Pacific, other countries also, as you mentioned, which is also reflected through your Quad and many other agreements that you were signing, bilateral as well as some multi-country agreements also, is immense. What in Japan's mind or in your mind will be the success factor for Indo-Pacific? What will be its main objectives, maybe 5 years, 6 years down the line, and what will be its main success factor?
Thank you very much for your questions. Yeah, there are many, strong points and important points of the Indo-Pacific for Japan and also for all countries concerned. And first, geopolitics. You can easily understand how important this region is in the world. If you can see the maps, that this linked Pacific Ocean and Indian Ocean. And as I said, that so many populations and natural resources and marine resources are here in this region. And this is a very important sea lane, for the many countries are depending on this stability and this region as sea lane. And also, in this region, very big, massive, and young and dynamic populations are here. And also, that, for example, that internet, what they call it. This is the world's fastest growing internet penetration user level. And digital economy will be very important in the future. And also, clean energy, somebody already mentioned, also very important. And I feel that these areas can provide the future on this digital economy and renewable energy. These are the very important topics. So in that sense, we can see limitless potentials and possibilities for this region. And as I said, that the stability, peace and stability of this region is quite important, especially for Japan. But now that I think we have several challenges on this, to this in the Pacific region. Maybe one is we never accept kind of the unilateral attempts to change status quo by force. So we should be united against this kind of attempts. Second, maybe some non-tariff, barriers, and also arbitrary tariffs are very dangerous to the economy of Indo-Pacific, and these will always, lead to the protectionism in economy, world economy, and sometimes in the past, it it was the reason of the World War. So we should be very careful this kind of movement. And also, of course, that the pandemic, this kind of the unforeseen, issues. So in the Pacific regions, for countries, concerned should be united and should give the wisdom to maintain the peace and stability. And FOIP is not the exclusive, group. As long as country, put importance on the rule of law, international law, or transparency, free trade. So we welcome any countries to come into FOIP. That's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm also glad that I just got to know you will be staying through at least, so I'm really glad if you can. Yeah, thank you. I'll now come to Dr. Bradley, over video from Cambodia. So it will be very important to hear his views from the CLMV, their views about the Indo-Pacific. So Dr. Bradley, over to you.
Thank you very much. And let me just begin by thanking the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry for the invitation. I'm very sorry that I wasn't able to be there in person today, but I very much enjoyed listening to the panels from here in Phnom Penh. As the chair noted and really well summarized with the lengthy list of institutions that we see operating today, we are in a different period, a different era. And I think that as we've gone through sort of the movement from a bipolar world to a unipolar world, now to theoretically moving into a multipolar world, everybody's been waiting for what's next. Everybody's been looking for, does this just end in a US versus China rivalry with two competing blocs? And here in ASEAN, that's very much been what folks have sought to avoid. But I think rather than looking at what's next, I think it's more important to look at where we are now and begin to accept that this is the new reality. That the structural changes that we've seen the U.S. pulling out to a very large degree, but also the economic and demographic changes that China's confronting, have brought us to a world where we are essentially entering a new phase, a phase of minilateralism. And we all talk about minilateralism. We think of it in the concepts of the Quad, and we think of it in AUKUS and so on and so forth. But oftentimes we think of it as, well, this is just what's happening now. This is simply a short-term, temporary equilibrium. But my view is that it's not, is that this is actually where we're moving towards and where we're at present. Neither a U.S. versus China bloc or a full ASEAN-led multilateral mechanism is really going to function. And here in ASEAN, we've begun to see this much more explicitly. We see challenges in the region that we are not able to address fully as ASEAN. The most obvious one, and the one having the greatest impact on India, is, of course, the Myanmar situation. ASEAN has tried. ASEAN has not been able to resolve this. We obviously have the South China Sea question, which next year is going to come up and become much bigger as the Philippines takes on the chairing role of ASEAN. But the divisions between ASEAN, between maritime and mainland have only and continue to increase. So what we're into now essentially is not a traditional bipolar situation anymore, or even unipolarity, but rather the parallel is really the concert of Europe from the 19th century, and that's really what we need to look at in terms of the precision and detail that needs to be taken in order to make this actually effective as a new minilateral interim order. In terms of minilaterals and why they function and why we're seeing these as actually being effective, is they simply work out of speed and focus. I mean, the ability to have easier alignment of interests and to build essentially coalitions of the willing on various topics. We see that now again, just coming up recently with the Philippines New Zealand troop agreement, and of course the various new supply chain arrangements that have been made. At the same time, we also have seen this here in the Greater Mekong region, here in the CLMV states, for quite some time. And the Greater Mekong region, I think, really demonstrates well both the benefits of minilateralism in the region, but also some of the key challenges. So here we have, in the Greater Mekong subregion, we have no less than 14 different minilateral entities that operate to do everything from infrastructure development to simply trade facilitation to gender questions. And these have been effective in a number of levels in terms of capacity building and being able to solve some sub-regional issues. They've also had the challenge of fragmentation. When you have a total of 14 different multilateral entities operating in one region, yes, there is competition and there is no central source for coordination. And this is the lesson, I think, moving forward that our region, our sub-region can share to the rest of the Indo-Pacific, is that coordination there will simply not be an external coordinator. And the way to avoid fragmentation is to ensure that multilateral groupings have an incredibly clear focus, that they do not simply take on everything or try to do everything, which we've seen here in the greater Mekong region. Rather, single issue areas that have open membership, that are very, very transparent in their activities, can actually be most effective. And this does seem to be improving here in the region, particularly as we have Chinese-led mini-laterals, we have American-led mini-laterals, we have Indian-led mini-laterals in the form of Mekong Gonga. So as we see this developing, this is not something to be afraid of. It's something that simply has to begin to be structured more clearly and in order to be more effective. It is not also the enemy of multilateralism. I think that's been one of the most commonly touted phrases in recent years, that, multilateralism is just a step back. Rather, we have to begin to look at it as, well, this seems to be our best option in light of the structural conditions at place. And at the same time, it does not need to move us away from here in ASEAN our commitment to things such as ASEAN centrality. That can move ahead. But we also have to be realistic that now with Timor-Leste entering with 11 members, we're not going to be able to agree on everything. And moving forward with more partial groupings is likely to be more effective in the short term. So let me go ahead and stop there. I'm sorry I went over time by a little bit. Looking forward to questions and discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Bradley. No, you didn't overshoot your time. We were well within your time. We'll come back to you with a question which is going through my mind, not now, but when you come back to you later. You picked up this unipolar, bipolar, and also mentioned about the bilateral, multilateral, now maybe minilateral. So there are a lot of conundrums through which we are now going, that which is best for the global economy or for even a regional economy or for a country's economy. What kind of association will that be? I'll come back to you later with a question that what will be the glue factor? What will be the binding factor, the common binding factor? That one common minimum agenda we call, or one common minimum program which will bind these Indo-Pacific countries together with so many of the various kinds of agreements within them or even outside Indo-Pacific that they are actually in the process of doing. So we'll come back to you with that, what could be the main common binding thing between us. With this, we will now go to Dr. Satish Mishra. Yes, please. And Dr. Mishra is from Indonesia. A very profile is a very well-known academician as well as a practitioner.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. I have some acquaintance with Calcutta. I spent a few years teaching at Presidency College, Calcutta. And I have relatives here, so it's a great pleasure to come back, and I'm very grateful for the organizers of this meeting to invite me here. The trouble with very difficult topics is that we simply add to their difficulty by bringing another nuance, another factor which is realistic but doesn't really move us to any kind of solution. And one of the things I want to do today is to try to break that trend and produce an argument rather than an assessment. But I want to begin with something that Arnie Schwarzenegger was reputed as saying is, don't let any crisis go to waste. And we are in the middle of several such crises, and so it's important not to let these crises go to waste. So that's the approach I'll take. Clearly, we are also in a region which has phenomenal diversity. Even if we just take ASEAN, we find that actually it's much more diverse than the EU. We think ourselves as a rather peaceful region, but we did some work on conflict and so on, and found that our region is the one which is most prone to conflict, has the largest number of deaths in wars and conflict than anywhere else in the world. It's not Africa, it's not Latin America, it's Asia, and it's part of where we are living today. So a lot of these are sobering factors. Now, talking about building multilateral cooperation and so on, and now in a multipolar world, which I'll come to the end. It seems to me that the first thing that is missing, or the first problem with the approach, is that if we speak to numbers, and we look at particular trends, and we're really looking at areas of cooperation that we want to promote. But that it's not the same thing as multilateral cooperation in terms of cooperation between countries and entities and so on. And I'll give you an example from my own country, Indonesia. One of the things that's happened in Indonesia that most people will not know is that since the year 2000, literally every single institution in Indonesia has been subject to massive reformation and change. It's the military, it's the political system, it's the central bank, it's the level of governance, it's rules on anti-corruption, etc., etc., etc. And if you did a comparison of what Indonesia has done with what the former USSR has done, the agenda of reform in Indonesia is much bigger. And it has managed in 20 years to ensure that the military is back to the barracks. Military which ruled the country for over 4 decades is back to the barracks. It's actually seeded quite a stable democracy. There is nobody in Indonesia who thinks there will be a military coup a la Thailand. And at the same time, the economy is growing at a steady pace of 5.5%. And there is no projection that I know of which says that this will be, there will be any kind of major shock over the next 10, 15 years. So this is a remarkable achievement. And on top of that, it's a moderate Islamic democracy. Now, coming back to this multilateral cooperation issue, clearly, one way out is not the general consensus model, because that's a language of rights and equality and so on, which is correct. But in terms of moving the ball, one of the things that we could do is to promote a much closer integration, cooperation between India and Indonesia. Because between them, they are the two of the largest countries in the world. And if we think of an Asia which is bipolar, let's say inside Asia, with one pole around China and the other pole around India, Indonesia, then we have a completely different scenario by which we can think about multilateral cooperation. I spent some time at the OECD, and we used to have a criteria which was major player and mutual interest. And clearly the India-Indonesia fits that bill. They are both major players, and there's a mutual interest in a whole series of ways. And we haven't moved very far until now because we really haven't done our due diligence. When in the corporate area, the moment we want to do something, we do due diligence. But actually, neither India nor Indonesia has done much due diligence about the other because the level of knowledge of each other is so dramatically low. And it's time to do that. And if we do that, we see two things. One is that in this area of globalization, on the one side, we are being pushed apart. The level of globalization is being reduced, etc., and that we sort of fragment. And in that fragmentation, everybody is looking to ensure that at least goods of critical necessity, food, energy, and so on, that we are somehow self-sufficient in that. That's one side. And the other side is, and that is in a way focusing on specific countries. The other side is there are also pressures which focus on making us work together. Now, which are these areas? For example, if we look at all the problems of the future, artificial intelligence, climate change, control of international pandemics, research and development on new technologies like nanotechnologies, etc. Those can only be done at large scale. So on the one hand, we are reverting back to self-sufficiency and so on at the national level, but all the technological advances of the future are telling us that we have to work at larger scale with neighbors and so on, and clearly India-Indonesia connection here can produce a large enough scale. They have very large domestic markets and a young population, etc. So we have these two different kind of tendencies, even coming out of the current crisis. One is how to ensure that we have our basic interests, strategic interests and goods on the one side, and the second, how do we work together to meet the challenges which are already here. My last point is that when we look at the view of the future, we shouldn't only be looking at future threats, but also of future possibilities. And perhaps in the middle of threats is the best time to look at those future possibilities. And it seems to me that there are many areas, for example, in the area of artificial intelligence. Indonesia, I was surprised to find myself, has the largest number of hackers in the world and is a major force in terms of human capital related to artificial intelligence, and clearly is an area that we can connect with them. We can connect certainly in areas of pharma and technologies relating to in the medical field. We can connect with them in areas of trade, in minerals and so on. We can connect with them in areas of tourism and investment relating to infrastructure and so on and so on. But we still haven't done our sums. The amount of information I said is very poor. So in the spirit of don't let a crisis go to waste, we established this institution called the Arthashastra Institute. The aim of that is to try to bring these two countries together to at least have a second pole in Asia which can balance China, and then give the opportunity of the smaller countries to be able to cooperate with India, Indonesia as this second pole. And that's another approach to promoting multilateral cooperation. It can be done by groups, it's done by sequences, rather than individually when we talk about everybody all the time. And so that would be my advice. And I hope that this will be the beginning of a much more strategic view rather than diplomatic view of how we should move forward. So thank you very much.
Dr. Mishra, thank you. And as you very interestingly spoke about the India-Indonesia relationship, and you also touched upon the China, that we have to build the counter strength. But that's also one of the questions which was in my mind, and I thought this will be the right time to ask, but you need not answer it now. I'll come back to you. That the people also say that this Indo-Pacific is a defensive strategy. It's a defensive strategy basically to counter a particular country's monopolistic or an incursional attitude. It is not so much driven by their own economic prosperity, it's more driven by a counter-defensive strategy. Now, is that so? That's number one. And that also takes me to the question of little bit, which I would want you to touch upon, because you were in the best position to touch, is on our waterway security. It is on our South China Sea, the Strait of all the straits which is there, Strait of Hormuz, Strait of all the other straits, the occupancy, there's the choking points. And all we know about the China's, this 9 dash that they consider that above that is their priority. So how would that affect this Indo-Pacific thing, because what we take pride is in the, as I was counting, the 17 sea corridors and trades which we have. Now, if that, does it create an indication of more solidity, we can leverage it, or it creates a feeling of an insecurity amongst us? I'll come to you on that. And now, moving to Mr. Sagar, and very eminent banker and now an academician, on his views on this Indo-Pacific.
Well, thank you, Amrish, for the introduction, and let me also take the occasion to thank the organizers for having me here, discuss some very, very important issue at this critical juncture. And I believe Indo-Pacific, even though it is not an economic concept in terms of either a sort of an integrated economic area in terms of trade or money or anything like that, it's neither an integrated area in terms of the geopolitics of it. We don't have a grouping pan-Indo-Asia. And yet, I think it's a very important concept, because that's what is binding us in some form, that we have the flexibility to deal with each other. And that flexibility is very, very important part in a world which is getting very divided geopolitically, very divided in terms of the new global economic order that we are beginning to see emerge. And that is where the tensions are coming from. And I think this forum can emerge as a peoples-to-peoples interaction, and therefore very glad to share my thoughts, be it academic, be it practical, over areas of cooperation that we can discuss. But before I delve into it, let me just put very forthrightly and very straight the issue of what is driving the current sort of tensions which are growing globally. And I think we need to understand what exactly is happening in the world, because it's really the economic order that is changing, which is actually driving much of the changes that we see in geopolitical setup now. If you were to view what exactly has happened in the Indo-Pacific area, and Indo-Pacific area technically includes the United States, which still enjoys the world's largest output share when it is measured in dollar terms, and probably not the largest share. It's the China which is the largest output share when it comes to PPP-based GDP rather than dollar GDP. Now, both China and Japan have lost global output shares hugely. And I can give you some numbers to that effect. US share in dollar terms has fallen from 34.6 in mid-80, 34.6%, to currently it's basically down to 26.4%. So roughly a 10% loss in output share. Even in PPP terms, if you were to see, it's a downfall from 22.3 to 15%, a large drop in terms of the PPP GDP. Japan's share has fallen from 16.3% to 3.6%. In PPP terms, from 8.6% to 3.3%. In contrast, India's global share has gone up radically, and also China's share has gone up radically. Now, having said that, this clearly then becomes an issue that the conventional powers that be are sort of losing their dominance in the global economy and are willing to try in some form to preserve the interests. To be an honest observer, independent observer, I'd say Japan's approach has been very, very pragmatic, very, very positive, and they are really participating in this development, helping countries in the region to come forward and grow along with them, at the same time give them some share of prosperity. The approach elsewhere has not taken that, and I must record my appreciation, Mr. Honorable Ishavaka. I see a lot of efforts on trade and finance in the region that Japan is taking the load on. And in a world which is becoming geopolitically very staggered, I think this is the approach where we can stitch back the world. If we all adopt that sort of approach, we can stitch back the word in many fashion. Now, how do we do that? I mean, that's $1 million question. And I think there are various areas of multilateral cooperation. And I would also say that Bradley raised a very important point in the sense that minilateralism is not at conflict with multilateralism. And I think that's the way to go about in Indo-Pacific region, that we all need to work together in the areas we can and step that up. And the first thing which comes to my mind is basically the trade issue, the global trade issue, since today is the tariff war issue, which is getting the world divided in many forms. And I think while I still believe, being an economist, the hard economics of it tells us that free trade is the best option. So I was glad to hear yesterday when Chief Economic Advisor on sideline said somewhere that maybe there is a possibility of 10 to 15% tariff arrangements coming into place. And that's the way we need to move towards. But also, in terms of the Indo-Pacific cooperation, it's also important that we have a relook at the RCEP, and we have Ministry of External Affairs people here, so I would urge them that basically the government can push for relooking the RCEP, and countries in the region could also work towards that because there has to be some proportionality and some sort of interest of India needs to be taken care in that respect to crowd India into a large pan-Asia market. And this would probably bring in a sea change when the country can live with 10-15% tariff. I see no reason why we cannot be part of RCEP. And only the sectoral interests have to be taken care of. My second area of cooperation is in terms of multilateral development banks. And I think we have two very important banks in the region, apart from, or three in particular, the Asia ADB, the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, and the new development bank, the BRICS Bank, which has come into being. When I say the infrastructure gap globally, it's of an order of $15 trillion of investment would be required to bridge the infrastructure investment gap. But what we still have from these development banks together funding is of an order of 1 trillion, which gets distributed in the Asia Pacific. Asia Pacific actually accounts for roughly 60% of the world population and 62% of the global output. And with that kind of thing, 1 out of 15 is not enough funding to meet the infrastructure gap. And therefore, there is a need for all of us to join and crowd in more capital into these multilateral development banks, change the nature of these institutions to more democratic institutions than a few countries dominating these institutions. The third angle of cooperation which I want to highlight is the regional financing arrangements. I think this is one area which is not often recognized because this basically central bank swaps. So it's not very talked about and stuff. I think it's important that the RFAs we have made in the region become more effective, be it CMIM, be it the BRICS CRA. And we need to sort of stitch them along with the IMF Global Financial Safety Net and work towards that CMIM has increased its firepower from 120 billion to 240 billion recently. The BRICS CRA is at 100 billion. These can be very important should large-scale crisis come up at any point of time. And in this thing, I would really appreciate what Japan has done. And Japan has come up with a 75 billion bilateral swap line for India. And I think that's one region, one area we don't really sufficiently acknowledge, but I'm really sort of grateful because while none of these lines have been tested, we cannot forget that we did face Asian financial crisis. And we cannot say it will never get repeated. So we need to be prepared for that. The fourth thing is the monetary cooperation. So in that, I would still say that let it evolve. There's no need to rush things up. Dollar is losing its hegemony. Its share in global reserves has fallen from around 70% in 1999 to, if I look at latest data, 52.4% in March of 2025. So there is a clear decline of dollar. Even in trade invoicing pattern, we see a shift in change. But this is not something which will either go in either direction. And it's getting neither in favor of RMB, and there are other currencies which are emerging, so we can be more patient to see how this is and limit our, where local currency bond market, for instance, could be developed, but the payment systems still need to be very carefully seen in that respect. The last point I want to make is on basically the digital cooperation. And what we are seeing now is an AI/ML revolution in which every country is trying to create national champions, forgetting the interest of the common person. Gone are the days where these wars were subservient to global competitive pressures. And the first thing was to see how they are affecting consumer welfare. Now, no country is bothered about how to see how consumer welfare is getting affected. They want to create national champions at the cost of consumers. And that is something we need to lean against. And we need to also use digital technology more sort of powerfully. India has actually a great innovation in terms of the UPI, and it has offered to other countries. And I think that's where it should be. India should not overpush anything on that count. It should rather come from people who need that technology. And I'm glad to say that what I learned 2 days ago is there are 17 countries in Africa which are now sort of in discussion with India over how the Indian stack could be replicated in Africa and stuff. Tanzanian team is right here in India at the moment doing that. So at the moment, international cooperation, the international NPCI is dealing with 7 countries, but this would grow, and any Indo-Pacific country can always reach out to India, and India would do the needful. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sagar. You did touch upon the most contentious subject, and I think you're the first speaker to touch upon the contentious subject of tariff. Now, one question that I have is, and I'll come back to you again for an answer on that, is even the US imposed tariff has varied from 10 to 15% within the countries of Indo-Pacific. So there are some countries at 50, some countries at around 10 or 15, that itself creating a hugely varying interests within the countries, whether to trade with US or to trade within the Indo-Pacific. So how do we resolve this external induced thing which can create a kind of differences within the country? That's number one. And the second thing, you touched that upon regional financing and the regional financing and pool to be created, like the BRICS. I mean, should we also be going for a bank, like Indo-Pacific should be having their own bank, own currency at any point in time? Do you think that's something very feasible? So I will be, and as a banker, I will come back to you once when Rahul is done with Rahul's talk.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to the Chamber for having me here. Now, of course, we have heard for the last hour or so, and there's already a good amount of discussion that has happened on Indo-Pacific, and I wonder how I add to it, actually. So I scribbled a few bullet points, and I hope I make justice to my presence here. So the Indo-Pacific region as a whole, or any particular region, has been there for years. We often have been saying that the entire CLMV region, or for the ASEAN region, we have historic ties with it. And that was something that has been doing the rounds for many, many years. But ultimately it means business. And it's basically trade, it's basically investments, and that is what brings countries together. Whether in economic theory, we say the Ricardian theory, one will produce what they can produce best. But again, the self-reliance came in, maybe specifically when the COVID happened, and everyone wanted to be on their own. And somewhere down the line, though I will not diverge away, US to somewhere has got emphasis around that region as well. But Indo-Pacific as a whole, there's no particular countries which you can define it. But there's something called the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, that IPEC have come in. Now, if you find IPEF, if I just touch upon it, you will find that it also has a trade deficit by itself, if I can take all the countries together. Almost $6 trillion worth of exports was done by IPEF. On the other hand, 7 trillion, a little more than that, was imports. But both of these countries actually have US dominance. If you see the trade deficit of all the countries of IPEF, you will have a few of them which have the trade surplus, and Vietnam being one of the very few. Vietnam has, of course, an export GDP ratio phenomenally well, and that's why they have been doing well. And they have diversified over the last 20-25 years. If you see what they actually have been producing 25 years back and what they're producing now is significantly different. They were significantly on agriculture and tea, and all these items were part of their pedigree. But they've evolved. Now they produce engineering goods. They engage with multilateral countries now today. FTAs that ASEAN has signed over the period of time has done phenomenal good to this entire IPEF region, or the entire Indo-Pacific region for that matter. And that has all worked in their favor. Now, but then amidst this all, there's also been a fact where these countries have not been, okay, let me give an example of ASEAN for that matter. India and ASEAN has signed an FTA trade agreement in 2010. In fact, that was the first time, after almost more than 2 decades, because one of the first FTAs that India had signed was SAFTA, which was a non-starter ever. And it was in the 1980s, and then after a long, long time, India signed the ASEAN Free Trade Agreement in 2010. And we had signed an FTA with Japan, another Indo-Pacific region like South Korea as well. And we have burnt our fingers in all three. And then we decided for long that we will not get into this sphere for long. And then, of course, of late, we have done 2-3 FTAs recently. Coming to ASEAN FTA, you will find that India has, trade deficit has increased by almost 6.5-7 times. We had $7 billion, now it is almost 45 billion trade deficit. So we have not made good of the trade agreements that we have signed, and we have lost on it continuously, and that is not because they were smart, but we were not that smart. We were not producing goods that the world needs. We were not producing good what the Indo-Pacific region for that matter is. So when I'm saying ASEAN, which is also part of almost the Indo-Pacific region, we have South Japan, we have an FTA with them, South Korea, we have an FTA with them, Australia, we have signed another FTA. So we are there, India connected with them somehow or other. But somehow we have not been able to make good of what we have done. And they have done better for it. Another reason was also there over a period of time when while we have signed a free trade agreements with all these Indo-Pacific region, the rules and regulations are quite stipulated, quite fixed. But non-tariff barriers, the underlying thing that was been playing a lot of importance, and that's where we were losing ourselves out. So whether it be the phytosanitary issues, the technical barriers, TBT issues, whether be the compliance issues that are there, customs issues that are there. In fact, I'll give you an example. India is doing very well in pharmaceutical, generic pharma. Now, when we want to export to pharma to these Indo-Pacific region, within inverted commas, they're smart enough because they will say that you have to come and get themselves tested in our domestic territory, and then you can put it up. Whether it be Malaysia, which actually from where thrives on palm oil, but when we want to get into pharmaceutical, they have multiple rules and regulations in place. Same with Vietnam, another pharma market that we can easily get into, but we are not able because the MRA or all these regulations that are there, which are actually eating our places into it. So somewhere down the line, the Indo-Pacific as a whole, of course, India in particular, since speaking from the point of India, but the region has to come together, has to connect the dots and see how best we can work in such a dynamic environment that we are there. Developed countries are eyeing Indo-Pacific not because of anything else, but because they want to counter China, and we have to agree to it. They do not want business. They want to counter China. That's why they're coming and engaging the Indo-Pacific region. They want to secure their own region. So they have I won't say an ulterior motive, but they have a reason for it. There's a Agency de France, AFD France, have a huge presence in this Indo-Pacific region. They have almost 40-50 manpower sit in Delhi. Bangladesh, they have a presence over there. They want to get into the Indo-Pacific region like anything else. So these multilateral regions are also coming in there. So where does India come in and how does this region come in? So we have to stick together and see how best we can work. Whether it be, let's say, on the sustainability part, the chief economic advisor was speaking on it. Japan has supported India over the years like anything else. Like it was already being mentioned, and we should really acknowledge that. In fact, but at the same time, when we are having the circular economy that was being taught about and spoken about, we should take a limb from them and seek Japan's help to build it into India as well, into this entire Indo-Pacific region. And that is where these things, the collaborative effort of learning from each other is something that would be required for Indo-Pacific to grow and evolve over a period of time. We mentioned that there are 3 multilateral agencies, whether New Development Bank, Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, or even Asian Development Bank. But below it, there are a lot of ECAs that are there, the export credit agencies that are there in the entire Indo-Pacific region. And these are all done by the government of the respective countries that are there. There is a possibility that the government and the Indo-Pacific region, which is not as a formal file, but the government of these countries should come together and see how these ECAs can work together and help each other and see this region grow. And that is something that we should see that works out. I will end my discussion over here and look forward for further involvement. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahul. You touched upon a very important point of the self-sufficiency, the self-independence of the Indo-Pacific. And just for this session, I was doing a little bit of my research, and I figured out that under the earth materials or the commodity, if we just pull all the Indo-Pacific, leaving US and China out of it, just pull all the other Indo-Pacific nations, we figured out that we are extremely self-sufficient. I mean, we need not actually take it from anyone else. But when it was coming to advanced manufacturing, there I found out that research was showing up that our major import into the Indo-Pacific is coming from an advanced manufacturing, which is an overcoming deficiency, because that's a question of skill development, advanced manufacturing, advanced technology and all. So that's a very important point that if we want, we actually can make it. But the issue that comes up, which also you touched upon, is the varying level of these non-tariff barriers. Even the logistic management index, the LMI of these various countries also vary significantly between themselves. So how do we really overcome these NTBs, have a consistent NTBs with the different levels of legal maturity, and how do we also bring the LMI also at a common level? Now, here we end the first part, and I will quickly go back to the speakers for their second observation very quickly. So we are really running short of the time now. And Dr. Bradley, I'll go back to you. If you can just touch upon the point I left with you, or if any other summing points from your end that you would like to add.
Sure. Sure. Thanks very much. On the question of binding and how this moves forward, I think there's simply no common aspect, no common initiative that is going to bind everybody. I mean, there's climate change is as far as we've gotten so far. Here in the greater Mekong subregion, we're fortunate enough that we have a shared river that requires collaboration. So this is a fairly traditional collective action problem, collective action situation. So I think how it moves ahead is we're going to see different motivations for differing states on differing issues. So just as we've seen on standard security issues and hedging, yeah, some states are going to bandwagon and collaborate more effectively on South China Sea issues, simply because it's directly in their interest to do so. Next year, we'll likely see some variant of this here in Southeast Asia, as again, Philippines takes on the chair, and this is the Philippines' major security issue. It'll be very interesting to see Vietnam's choice there. Others, yeah, there will be elements of normative collaboration. Again, South China Sea on freedom of the sea and so on and so forth. And simply as a way to not block China. But for other states, yes, they do see avoiding any activity that can yield binary alignment as ultimately a good thing. So the incentives are there on differing topics. And I mean, and the real positive outcome of this is that multilateral cooperation and collaboration has numerous positive spillover effects. And that's really what I think we have to bear in mind. This is able to set agendas at a higher level where there are institutions that aren't able to really directly resolve these. I mean, we have to think back to the Quad itself, I mean, which found its origin, of course, in tsunami relief. And look where it is now. So in my view, this is something that we need to embrace. We need to be realistic about. Know that everyone's not going to join in on everything, but that's actually, in this form of Goldilocks multilateralism, not too big, not too small, just right. Multilateralism is our way ahead. Thanks very much.
Brilliant, Dr. Bradley. Thanks very much. So, Dr. Mishra, going back to you on the security issue, as well as whether this whole Indo-Pacific is a defensive strategy against China, or more oriented towards our own economic prosperity?
Well, that's an easy question, so let me try and see how to answer it. Can I just say that it's time now to look to the future for two reasons. One is we have to actually get a sense of whether the unipolar world is really at the end. Is there any way to put it back, or are we really in a multipolar world? My view is that we are, and is in our lifetimes, we are not going back to a unipolar world. But in that context, there is another issue before I answer the China question, because they are related. We did a little bit of research, and what we did was we took the top 50 corporations in the world and we put them in a table of country GDP. So if the corporations were countries, where would they be in the rankings and so on? And interestingly, of course, you find that NVIDIA has the same market capitalization and value as India at $4 trillion. Apple is richer than Germany, and so on. So it's not only the technology side, it's the governance side also internationally. When Musk goes and gives money to the Reform Party in the UK, this affects the governance, affects the decision making and the way countries will react. So we've got the technology, we've got the end of the, if you agree with me, an end of the unipolar world, and we don't know what the multipolar world would really look like. And in that context, we're also then looking at the bilateral or multilateral issues of China and whether it's a threat and whether it's possible to repair damaged relations and so on and so on. So all these things are very connected. And on coming back to the China question, it seems to me that if you assume that we are in a multipolar world, then I don't see the Chinese as a threat in the sense that they are suddenly going to stop trade inside the Asia Pacific. There will be military action and so on, more than a skirmish. Because if they wanted to do that, even now, I don't see that the rest of the world is particularly going to come to the rescue of a particular island, or indeed even of Taiwan, if the Chinese want it. We, after all, took over Goa. And apart from the usual protests, not much happened. Look at what's happening in Gaza. Look at our border skirmishes with China. The main point is India and China have never fought a major war in their history. But the same thing is also true of Indonesia. The Indonesians also have never fought a major war with either India or China. So if we think of terms of a bipolar or a tripolar Asia as the new center, if you like, of global influence and economy, then of course the multilaterals will also look very different. So when we talk about resuscitating the multilaterals, creating a new kind of multilateral governance or cooperation, you have to begin with what you think about in terms of the kind of future that we are facing. Is there a retreat to unipolarism? It's certainly not going to be a Cold War kind of situation. So there's a lot of uncertainty there in trying to answer this question. And my last point is simply that in a new world of technologies which are moving very fast, where governance structures may become much more autocratic and particularly influenced by global firms who don't have country loyalties. I don't believe that when you look at Apple, you think only that this is an American company per se, that we really know into a new era where you have global firms who make decisions on global. So unless we have some sense of what we think about these things, it's very difficult to talk about multilateral cooperation and so on the way we're doing it. So I think, unfortunately, it means connecting more dots, but these dots are moving very fast. And so my advice is we look at the evolution of the multipolar world. We look at what new governance structures are coming along with the rise of the international oligarchy. And then we try to see whether in the Asian context, there is a need to revise our perspective of the future of India, China, by using Indonesia as a mechanism to rebalance some of these ideas.
Thank you. Ironically, Dr. Mishra, to establish the prophecy of a multipolar world, but the names which you picked up, Apple, Nvidia, Musk, are all coming from one pole only. So that's ironical, but it will change. I understand it will, of course, be changing.
No, but they are not. That the point is that they come from one pole, but they are not identified as American companies, or in the same way that Tata's cannot only be an Indian company.
Thank you. Now, going to you, Mridul, the question that the tariffs are itself creating a variation among the psyche of the nations in Indo-Pacific, and would you foresee a bank or a common currency within these nations?
So I touched upon this when I said about the monetary cooperation. I don't see this region as a possibility of a monetary union with a single currency possibility. From the works about the common currency area, it probably doesn't meet any sort of characteristics where you could launch a common currency. But short of that, you could have some cooperation in developing local currency bond markets. You can also have systems like Asian Clearing Union for settling payments in local currencies to a limited extent, because nobody would want to be saddled with currencies which don't really trade globally. So that would be basically sort of capping this sort of cooperation, even if we try to attain that. Trade cooperation can be substantially enhanced without necessarily the payment cooperation, and let the currency choice be dictated as these economies grow, whether they want to settle in dollar or they want alternative currencies. That is a little long-term phenomena of shifts. It will take place on its own. We can't really impose ourselves and say it has to be settled in this way or not that. What is important is to see 10 to 15% tariff levels, so India converging also to the global tariff levels, and that in itself would generate a lot of trade and welfare improvement in the region.
I mean, I agree. I mean, our currency strengths are varying hugely between the nations also here, but maybe, and considering that coming to a single currency at this point in time is really unthinkable. But what you have mentioned, I mean, in a smaller manner, we can move towards that. And coming to you, Rahul, what can we therefore be doing to really make these NTBs consistent, the LMIs consistent, which even though we have within us these raw materials and the materials below the earth and all done, but we still cannot do because of these varying NTBs?
One thing that I think we should start doing, especially since I mentioned about ASEAN, and that's been there for almost now 15 years, and we have a trade deficit. So there's an upcoming discussion that is there about in India and ASEAN countries. And at that point of time, India and both the ASEAN countries stand together, and they are also part of the Indo-Pacific. They should look at having an MRA, that the mutual recognition agreement should be there among all these countries to begin with, where they acknowledge each other's products with whatever limits that they want to put in. There should not be any knee-jerk interest that is there once things get exported there, and then just get hold on their port. So these rules and regulations that are there, that should be the first thing that they can look at it. Second, you mentioned, sir, about one of the minerals that you mentioned, a lot of rare earth minerals. India has signed few free trade agreements. One of them were with Australia, and where I think 2 or 3 items are there, zirconium and one or two more, where Australia is allowing 0% tariff, where India can import. So many of these things are not getting, people are not being educated about the opportunity that is arising of the new free trade agreements that are there, even in the Indo-Pacific region that is. So firstly, what I mentioned is that we should relook at the existing one, engage with these countries and see how best we can, because it is for the benefit of the region. One small example, let's say automobile industry of Japan. It was the front runner for decades. Now once electric vehicle EV has come in being, Japan is being little bit held back due to China is having the rare earth item that is there. So these are the changing dynamics that is there over a period of time. And eyeing this, it is important that all these Indo-Pacific countries come together, sit along, and for a common interest and looking at the future, they should see how best they can work together. That's it.
No questions possible, Sombe? Yeah, maybe 2 questions being sanctioned. So anyone having any question to the panelists? No. So I don't think there is any question. So I really thank firstly the Honorable Consul General for bringing to us the huge contribution of Japan and they're doing in the Indo-Pacific. Dr. Bradley, a wonderful concept of bringing that small mini poles raising to a much bigger multilateral or some small mini-laterals coming to the multilateral and trying to resolve through this conundrum of unipolar, bipolar and multipolar. Dr. Mishra, you brought in the take dimension to the whole Indo-Pacific along with various, and my takeaway from yours is that how the take can be the real enabling factor. You did touch upon many other important areas as well, and Mr. Sagar, you did touch upon the huge difficult concept of the currency and the strength of the banking and the financing in this region. So that's a very difficult concept and you brought it up. And Rahul, thanks for, my takeaway from yours is that MRA, this concept of this MRA and how this entire nations, all these nations can be brought to one single platform of NTB and LMI. So thanks very much to all my panelists for a wonderful, captivating session. Thanks.
Thank you, sir, and thank you so much for curating and moderating the session so wonderfully that you always do. We now have a pleasant task to perform. If I may request Ambarish sir to kindly hand over a token of our appreciation to the Consul General first. Please come. Thank you. Can we have a round of applause, please? Yeah, to Mr. Dr. Mridul Sagar, next. Next to Dr. Satish Mishra. To Dr. Mazumdar now. Mr. Rahul Mazumdar from Exim Bank. Thank you. Bradley will hold it with us. Next time you are in Calcutta, we will pass it on to you. Surely.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Can we have a